Theo Walker hadn't eaten in 3 days. His stomach had stopped growling sometime during the second night, replaced by a hollow ache that made his vision swim when he stood too quickly. Behind the abandoned Riverside steel yard beneath a tarp that smelled of mildew and rust, he waited for Dawn, 14 years old. No parents, no guardian, just the streets and the particular kind of silence that follows a person the world has decided to forget. The tarp rustled in the cold October wind, and Theo pulled his knees tighter to his chest. His sneakers had holes in them. His jacket was 3 sizes too big, stolen from a donation bin 6 months ago. The fabric kept him warm enough, but it couldn't fill the emptiness inside. Not the hunger, the other kind. The kind that came from being invisible. Ashford, Oregon wasn't a large town. 80,000 people scattered between the Cascade foothills and the industrial wasteland along the river. Most folks worked at the lumber mill or the distribution centers. Most folks had homes. Most folks didn't sleep behind steel yards with nothing but scrap metal for company. Theo stretched his legs and stood brushing dust from his worn jeans. The yard gates clanged behind him as he stepped into the alley. Maybe today he'd find enough copper wire to trade for a sandwich. Maybe someone would leave day-old bread behind the bakery on 5th Street. Maybe. The world was waking up. Trucks rumbled past on the main road. Birds stirred in the bare trees. Workers headed toward their shifts, breath misting in the morning cold. Normal life. The kind Theo watched from the outside, like pressing his face against glass. He shoved his hands deeper into his pockets and walked with his head down. Invisibility was a survival skill. Eye contact meant questions. Questions meant authorities. Authorities meant foster care, and Theo had learned that lesson 3 times already. The streets were brutal, but at least here he could see the danger coming. A sound stopped him cold, at first too soft to place, then clearer, high-pitched, panicked. A child's scream. Theo's heart kicked against his ribs. He whipped his head around, trying to pinpoint the direction. Another scream, louder this time. Behind the warehouse, he ran. The alley opened into a loading dock area. Morning light slanted between buildings, turning everything golden and sharp. Theo's breath came in gasps as he rounded the corner, and then he saw it. A man was shoving a girl into the back of a dark van. She couldn't have been more than 9. Blonde hair tangled around her face. Small pink backpack hanging from one shoulder. She twisted in the man's grip, feet kicking uselessly against the van's metal floor. The words tore from her throat with raw terror. Her voice cracked on the plea, breaking into sobs. The man grabbed her wrists and forced her deeper inside. Theo didn't think. The shout erupted from somewhere primal and desperate. His voice echoed off brick and concrete. The man's head snapped toward him. Broad shoulders, hard eyes, a face carved from granite and bad decisions. The spider tattoo on his left hand was black and crude like prison ink. He reeked of stale cigarettes and cheap beer even from 20 feet away. The man's voice was gravel and threat. He took a step toward Theo, one hand still gripping the girl's arm. But Theo moved forward anyway. Something in that scream had reached through his chest and wrapped around his spine. He knew that sound. He remembered it from his earliest memory, from a night he tried hard to forget. Being scared, being alone, being taken. He couldn't let another kid go through that. The switchblade appeared like a magic trick. Metal caught the morning light, sharp and serious and final. Theo's breath caught in his throat, but his feet didn't stop moving. He grabbed the nearest thing within reach. A length of rusted pipe discarded near a dumpster. His hands shook as he raised it. His heart hammered so hard he could hear it in his ears. The man barked a laugh. Dark, amused, the kind of sound predators make before they strike. Theo's voice cracked when he answered, but the words came out anyway. 3 syllables that shouldn't have required courage, but did. For a moment, the alley went silent. Wind, distant traffic, the girl's quiet shouts. Then the man moved. He lunged with practiced violence. Theo ducked, but he wasn't fast enough. The blade sliced across his left forearm, opening a burning line of pain. Blood welled immediately, hot and wet. Theo shouted and swung the pipe. The metal struck the kidnapper's hand with a sound like a bell. The knife clattered to the concrete. The man roared, grabbing Theo by his oversized jacket and slamming him back into the brick wall. Stars exploded across Theo's vision. The world tilted and blurred. His skull bounced off brick, and for a second he couldn't tell which way was up. But he didn't drop the pipe. His fingers stayed locked around the rust-pitted metal. He swung again, wild, desperate, just enough to knock the man backward a step. The girl screamed again, and the sound cut through Theo's days like cold water. He yelled at her, voice hoarse and urgent. She jumped from the van and sprinted toward the street. The kidnapper spun, reaching for her, but Theo tackled him from behind. All 98 pounds of malnourished determination. It bought her 2 seconds. 2 seconds that changed everything. Tires squealed at the end of the alley. Someone had heard. Someone was coming. The van door slammed. The engine roared to life. The kidnapper shoved Theo off and dove into the driver's seat. Theo pounded the side of the van with his fist, screaming words he didn't remember choosing. The van peeled out in a spray of gravel and exhaust gone before Theo could even process what had just happened. He stood gasping in the sudden quiet. His arm burned, blood dripped from his elbow onto the concrete, each drop a small red constellation. But he was alive. The girl stood at the mouth of the alley trembling. Tears streamed down her face. Her lip was bleeding. Her backpack hung open, contents spilled. She stared at Theo like he wasn't real. Like heroes weren't supposed to be barefoot kids living behind abandoned factories. Her whisper was barely audible. Theo forced a weak smile despite the pain screaming through his arm. He walked toward her, slowly trying not to show how dizzy he suddenly felt. She nodded, but her eyes were glazed. Still seeing the van, still feeling those hands. Theo understood. Some fears didn't leave just because the danger passed. Then she said something that made Theo's blood run cold. Her voice was tiny, almost apologetic. At the time, Theo thought she meant mad that she'd been grabbed. He didn't understand. Not yet. Not until 20 minutes later, when 70 bikers would ride into town looking for blood. Not his blood, the blood of the man who tried to take their little girl. Because Sophie Chen was the daughter of Marcus Reeves, president of the Ashford chapter of the Hells Angels. And when Marcus Reeves found out what had happened, the whole town would feel it. Sophie didn't move at first. She stood in the sunlight at the end of the alley, breathing in short, broken gasps. Her small hands shook violently. Theo walked toward her, clutching his bleeding arm, trying not to show the vertigo pulling at his balance. His voice came out softer than he intended, gentler, the way he wished someone had spoken to him when he was small and scared. But Sophie stared past him. Her eyes tracked the empty space where the van had disappeared, like she expected it to come roaring back, like the nightmare wasn't finished. Theo hesitated. He wanted to comfort her, wanted to crouch down and speak to her the way adults never spoke to him. But he didn't know how. He barely knew how to comfort himself. All he knew was one simple truth: she shouldn't be alone. Her voice was barely a whisper when she finally spoke. Theo nodded, but then he remembered. The last time he tried to borrow someone's phone, they'd threatened to call the cops on him, suspicious of the dirty kid with hollow eyes and desperate requests. Sophie looked at him again. Her gaze was direct despite the tears. Theo hesitated for only a second. They walked toward the sidewalk slowly, quietly. Theo kept glancing around. Every shadow felt suspicious now. Every sound could be the van returning. His arms stung with each heartbeat, but adrenaline kept the pain at arm's length. Sophie reached into her backpack and pulled out a small phone. Her hands trembled so badly she almost dropped it. She dialed. The phone rang once, twice, then a voice answered. Male, deep, concerned but controlled. Sophie broke. Her voice shattered on the word. Theo felt it in his chest, that particular frequency of a child's fear reaching for safety. She tried to explain through sobs, words tumbling over each other in fragments. Theo heard the voice on the other end change instantly. Not calm, not reassuring, cold, sharp, controlled fury barely leashed. Sophie turned and stared at the street sign across from them. No hesitation, no questions about injury or details, just certainty and movement. The call ended in less than 12 seconds. Sophie lowered the phone and wiped her nose on her sleeve. Her breathing was still ragged, but something had shifted. Hope, maybe. Or just the knowledge that someone was coming. But she shook her head. She swallowed hard. Theo blinked. Even a homeless kid knew what that meant. He'd seen the patches, heard the stories, listened to the warnings whispered on street corners. Don't cross them. Don't look at them. Don't get in their way. Suddenly, the man with the knife didn't seem like the only danger Theo should have worried about. Because when a Hell's Angel found out his daughter had been attacked, someone would pay. And Theo had no idea if they would believe his side of the story. The rumble started low and distant. Not one motorcycle, not two, dozens. The sound rolled through downtown Ashford like approaching thunder, engines thick and throaty bouncing between buildings, shaking windows in their frames. Sophie's back straightened immediately. Theo took a step backward. His heart pounded for entirely new reasons. He wasn't afraid exactly. He'd faced a knife minutes ago. But this was different. This was political, hierarchical, tribal. This was family, something Theo had never belonged to and didn't understand the rules of. The engines roared louder. Then they appeared. A line of motorcycles turned the corner onto Baker Street, chrome gleaming in the sunlight, exhaust cracking through the morning air like small arms fire. Leather vests covered in patches, tattoos visible on thick arms, sunglasses hiding eyes, heavy boots hitting pavement, one after another in a rhythm that felt choreographed. They didn't park neatly. They surrounded the street, claimed it, occupied it like an invading force. Theo stood frozen watching history unfold. People stopped on sidewalks. Drivers slowed their cars. Curtains moved behind windows in the apartments overhead. The town felt the shift, the fear, the respect, the gravity. At the front of the formation rode a man who made Theo's breath catch. Tall, broad enough that his shadow seemed to swallow the sun. Shaved head gleaming, gray beard trimmed close, shoulders like bridge supports. His leather vest carried patches Theo couldn't read from this distance, but one stood out in bold letters across his chest, President. He dismounted before his bike had fully stopped. Every movement purposeful, economical, nothing wasted. Sophie's voice was small and broken and relieved. She ran into his arms. He knelt immediately, massive but gentle. His hands moved over her with practiced care, checking for injuries, scanning every visible inch of skin. His voice was low when he spoke, but Theo heard it clearly in the sudden quiet. Sophie shook her head, though her eyes were still glossy with tears. The man exhaled once, slow, dangerous. Then his eyes snapped up to Theo. The bikers behind him turned too. At least 20 sets of eyes locked onto a barefoot kid bleeding from the arm, standing alone in torn clothes with nothing but courage and stupidity to his name. Theo squared his shoulders. He refused to step back. Didn't want to look afraid even though every instinct screamed at him to run. Even though his knees felt like water and his vision swam at the edges. Sophie tugged her father's vest. Silence descended. Not disbelief, not gratitude, just cold calculation. The president stood slowly and walked toward Theo. His boots struck pavement with weight and intention. Each step a drumbeat, each footfall a question. He stopped inches away, close enough that Theo could smell leather and motor oil and road dust. Close enough to be intimidating without touching. The word was both question and command. Theo's voice came out steadier than he expected. No last name, just like the president seemed to expect. Kids like Theo didn't always have full names. Sometimes they just had survival. The president's eyes swept over the bleeding cut on Theo's arm, deep enough to scar, angry red, still weeping blood. Sophie answered before Theo could form words. Her voice gained strength as she spoke, recounting, reliving. Each word a stone dropped into still water. The president looked back down at Theo. Theo didn't break eye contact, didn't flinch, didn't apologize. It wasn't bravado. It was just truth, the simplest truth Theo knew. The president stared at him for a long, quiet moment, measuring, weighing, deciding. Then he nodded once, a sharp dip of his chin. Behind him, a biker exploded with barely contained fury. His voice was gravel and rage. The president lifted one finger. Just one. The biker went silent instantly, completely. Like someone had flipped a switch. This man didn't need to yell, didn't need to threaten. He commanded with presence alone. He looked at Sophie again. She nodded. Her voice was quiet but certain. She shivered. The memory of cigarette smoke and alcohol fumes wrapped around her fear. A biker behind them cracked his knuckles. The sound was sharp as breaking branches. Someone muttered a name low and venomous. The president didn't react outwardly, but something behind his eyes darkened, hardened into stone. Bikes roared to life again. The sound was deafening, final. People in nearby buildings shut their windows. Birds went quiet. The air itself seemed to hold its breath. Sophie saw her father turning toward his motorcycle and grabbed his vest again. Desperation threaded through her voice. The president looked back at Theo. The kid stood alone, bleeding, clothes torn, hunger visible in the hollow of his cheeks and the sharp angles of his collarbone, but still standing tall, still meeting eyes, still refusing to disappear. The president extended one massive hand and said two words that would change everything. Not a request, not an offer, a statement of fact, an inevitability. Theo blinked. The president nodded once. Behind him, engines snarled. The hunt was beginning, and Theo Walker, who had nothing and no one, was about to climb onto the back of a Hell's Angel motorcycle and ride into something bigger than he could possibly understand. Theo had never been this close to a motorcycle in his life. The machine before him looked like it had been forged in some angry god's workshop. All chrome and black metal, leather seat worn smooth by years of road, handlebars thick as his wrists. The engine ticked as it cooled radiating heat into the morning air. He stood frozen, unsure if he was even allowed to touch something this powerful, this expensive, this real. The president jerked his head toward the bike. Theo swallowed hard. A big tattooed biker behind him grunted. His voice carried dark humor. Rough laughter rippled through the group. Not mean, just biker humor. The kind that lived in the space between danger and brotherhood. Sophie stepped forward. Her voice was hot but encouraging. Theo looked at her, then at the bike. It was massive. Chrome black. Powerful. A machine that looked like it only obeyed people who could wrestle storms and win. He nodded and climbed on behind the president, gripping the seat like his life depended on it. It kind of did. The president looked back just once. His voice was matter-of-fact, instructional. Theo nodded again. His heart hammered so hard he could hear it in his ears, could feel it in his throat. Engines revved in unison. Sophie and a few club members would stay at the clubhouse for safety. Everyone else was hunting. The formation rolled out, not fast at first, just purposeful, precise. This wasn't a parade, this wasn't a show. This was a military operation wrapped in leather and chrome. People pulled their cars to the curb at the sight of them. Not because they were scared exactly, but because they knew. When the Hells Angels moved like this, something was wrong. Someone was about to pay. The president called out over the roar of engines. His voice cut through the wind and noise. 3 bikers moved into the lead position immediately. Hand signals tight, practiced, efficient. They scanned intersections, alleys, storefronts, eyes sharp as hawks hunting. Another group peeled off to check the industrial district, another to sweep the truck routes heading toward the interstate. The organization was military, tactical, nothing like the chaos Theo had expected. The president spoke low, just loud enough for Theo to hear over the wind. His voice carried certainty, experience. This wasn't his first hunt. Theo held on, knuckles white against the hand grips. The question slipped out before he could stop it. The president's lip curled slightly, not quite a smile, something darker. Theo nodded slowly. He didn't know streets in that way. His survival was different. More day-to-day, minute to minute. Fight for scraps, run when needed, hide when necessary. A different education entirely. They reached the main highway and the group split again. The president called to a rider beside him, a lean man with gray streaking his black beard. The biker peeled off instantly. No hesitation, no questions. Just obedience born from trust and hierarchy. Theo realized something chilling. They were tracking Dale Garrett like a wolf pack, coordinated, efficient, deadly. And Theo was riding in the middle of it. At the town's edge, the president eased his bike to a stop beside a closed diner. Faded sign advertised breakfast specials from 1987. The rest of the formation slowed behind them. Asphalt hummed with idling engines. The president looked over his shoulder at Theo. Theo took a breath, recounted everything. The van, the scream, the knife, the smell of stale cigarettes and cheap beer, the spider tattoo on Garrett's hand. Black, crude, prison quality. The president's eyes narrowed at that detail. A biker with a scar running down his left cheek spat on the pavement. Theo swallowed. The biker cracked his knuckles again. That sound was becoming familiar, threatening and somehow comforting at once. Another biker added his voice, flat, factual. The president looked at Theo again, really looked, like he was reading something written in invisible ink on Theo's skin. The question hung in the air. Theo blinked. Wasn't it obvious a few bikers went silent? Not because they didn't understand, but because they did, more than most. One murmured under his breath. A radio chirped from the president's vest pocket. He lifted it to his mouth. Static crackled. Then a voice broke through, tight with discovery. The president didn't answer with words. He just revved his engine. The pack responded immediately. They moved hard, fast, but clean. No stunt riding, no weaving through traffic. These were men on a mission, not a circus act. Wind tore at Theo's face. His eyes watered. His fingers ached from gripping the handholds. But the faster they went, the more he felt something unfamiliar blooming in his chest. Trust, not of the road, not of the machine, but of the man in front of him. A stranger 12 hours ago. The first person in 3 years who seemed to actually listen. They reached the service road as the sun climbed higher. A cracked stretch of forgotten pavement leading into dusty foothills. Skid marks. Shattered headlight glass scattered like diamonds. Tire treads leading off the main road into scrub brush. A biker kneeled, pressed his palm into the dirt, studied the impression like reading Braille, then nodded. The president swung off his bike. Theo followed, legs shaky. His arm throbbed now that adrenaline was fading. Blood had dried on his skin, dark and sticky. Someone asked the question everyone was thinking. The president pointed at the ground. 3 distinct footprints. Heavy, deep. Boot treads clear in the dust. Beside them, smaller prints. Lighter, child-sized. The president's jaw flexed. He turned to his men. The bikers scattered like trained scouts, fanning out, reading terrain, looking for anything. Everything. Theo looked around. Heat shimmered off asphalt. The wind carried the distant hum of semi-trucks miles away on the interstate. Somewhere out here, Dale Garrett was still free, still dangerous. Anger started to burn in Theo's stomach. Not fear, not dread, anger. Because Sophie wasn't like him. She had someone coming, someone who would fight, someone who cared. And now maybe another kid was out there, alone, scared, waiting. The president walked back to Theo. His voice was quiet but firm. Theo blinked. No one had told him that in years, maybe ever. The president added matter of fact but waited. Theo looked down at his torn shoes. His voice came out barely above a whisper. The president stared at him for a long moment. Then he placed one heavy hand on Theo's shoulder. The weight was solid, real, grounding. Theo swallowed hard. The president shook his head once. From the trail beyond the brush, a shout rang out. Urgent, victorious. Engines roared to life. The hunt had turned into recovery, and Theo was right in the middle of it. The bikes tore down the cracked access road in tight formation. Dust whipped into the air behind them, turning late morning sunlight into a haze of gold and grit. Theo held on as the president leaned the bike into a sharp turn. Tires skidded slightly on loose gravel. The other angels followed with practiced precision. No wobbling, no panic, no fear. These weren't men who rode bikes. They commanded them. Up ahead, 3 riders had parked in a defensive formation around something half hidden in dead brush. The van, beat up, black paint scratched and faded, passenger door hanging open like a broken jaw. Theo felt his heartbeat jump into his throat. The president killed the engine and motioned for everyone to spread out. Within seconds, the angels were searching the perimeter, some checking tracks, others circling the van, one looking for prints in the dust near the vehicle's front end. The president approached the vehicle slowly, deliberately. Theo followed, still shaky from the ride and the adrenaline crash hitting his system. A biker with the road name Razor stitched on his vest crouched near the cracked headlight. Another voice spoke from inside the van, muffled but clear. Theo felt relief hit him like cold water. At least Sophie hadn't been kept in that place. At least she'd escaped before the nightmare could deepen. The president checked the rear bumper. His voice was flat. Razor shook his head. Another biker snorted from nearby. The president turned his head. His voice carried warning and wisdom. He stood straight and raised his voice to carry across the group. The angels moved immediately. Fast, silent, efficient. No yelling, no chaos. These men had searched for people before, maybe too many times. Theo stood by the open van door staring inside. A roll of duct tape, a greasy rag, a crushed beer can. Every item made his stomach tighten into knots. He imagined Sophie alone in that van, scared, helpless, trapped. A flash of memory stabbed through him. Younger, different van, different captor, crying in the back of a vehicle he never wanted to remember. He swallowed hard against the rising bile. The president noticed. He always seemed to notice. Theo nodded, though his voice wasn't steady. The president didn't push. Men who had lived in darkness could recognize others who'd been there too. A shout cut through the air like a gunshot. Every biker converged toward the sound. Theo hurried with the president's heart hammering against his ribs. A sandy patch of ground in the shade of a scrub tree showed deep, heavy prints heading toward a rocky ridge. But beside them, something else. Smaller prints, smaller strides. Someone running, someone small. Theo's eyes narrowed. The president scanned the tracks with practiced eyes. Liam's chest tightened. The president grabbed his radio, static, then voices confirmed from every direction. Acknowledgement, understanding. The Hells Angels were now in full pursuit of something bigger and darker than they'd first realized. A biker with a shaved head and neck tattoos kneeled and touched the prints. The president's jaw clenched tight enough to crack teeth. Theo felt the world tilt sideways. His pulse spiked. He remembered how terrified Sophie had looked. And she'd had help. She'd had her father and 70 bikers riding to save her. Whoever this new kid was, they were alone, dragged up a ridge by a predator. No one coming. Except now a biker army. They began climbing the rocky hillside, boots hammering on sandstone, gravel crunching under heavy soles. Theo scrambled after them, trying to keep up. Rocks slid under his worn sneakers with every step. Razor called out over his shoulder. Theo adjusted, focused on steady rhythm instead of speed. The president watched him from the corner of his eye, assessing, measuring. Theo didn't answer. He didn't need to. People who lived without walls learned to move through the world differently, learned to climb, to run, to survive. They reached a ridge overlook. Below on the other side lay an old drainage tunnel. Concrete, mossy, dark as a throat. Fresh footprints led straight into the opening. Razor clenched his teeth. The president signaled silently. 2 bikers flanked left, 2 flanked right. 2 more circled around the ridge. Theo watched in quiet awe. They were boxing Garrett in, creating a perimeter, cutting off escape routes. He'd never seen organization like this, not even from police. The president turned to Theo. His voice was low but firm. Theo started to protest. The president repeated, voice dropping an octave. The word lingered, heavy, weighted with history and pain. The president wasn't just reacting with biker anger. He was reacting with memory, with loss, with something that had happened before. Theo wondered what story sat behind that word, but now wasn't the time to ask. The bikers moved toward the tunnel entrance, slowed their steps, drew weapons. Not guns, not yet. Crowbars, knives, steel batons, things meant to break bones without echoing a gunshot through a canyon. Inside the tunnel was pitch black, silent, too silent. The president stepped in first. His voice echoed deep and resonant. Silence. Still nothing. Theo stood behind him, trying to slow his breathing, eyes straining to adjust to the darkness pressing against them like physical weight. Then a sound, soft, muffled, a child's cry. The president reacted instantly. The angels flooded the tunnel, boots hammering, flashlights flashing on, blades ready. Theo ran with them, heart in his throat, adrenaline surging through his veins like electricity. In the darkness ahead, a shadow moved. A man's voice barked out, sharp, desperate. The sentence cut short, followed by a child's scream, and the entire tunnel ignited with violence because the Hells Angels weren't here to negotiate. They were here to end this. The sound inside the tunnel was chaos and precision colliding. Footsteps, shouts, The metallic scrape of steel against concrete. Flashlights swung wildly beams, slicing the darkness into fragments. Theo pressed close behind the president, heart pounding like a war drum. The air was damp and cold. It smelled of mold and rust and fear. The walls dripped with condensation. Ahead, the president's voice bellowed through the tunnel. The angels surged forward, a wave of leather and muscle and righteous fury. The kidnapper was cornered now. No escape, no mercy waiting. A biker's flashlight beam hit the scene first. Dale Garrett, scruffy and wild-eyed, had a small boy clamped in one filthy arm. The other hand held a rusted switchblade pressed against the child's throat. The kid couldn't have been older than 7. Tears streaked through dirt on his face. Hands bound with duct tape, legs shaking so hard his whole body trembled. Garrett screamed, voice cracking with desperation. The angels froze in formation, not out of fear, calculation. These men had seen hostage situations before. They didn't rush, didn't shout. They let the president speak. He took one slow step forward. His voice dropped to a deadly whisper that somehow carried through the entire tunnel. Garrett laughed, wild, desperate, the sound of a man with nothing left to lose. The president replied, voice flat and factual. One of the bikers muttered under his breath. Another snorted softly. Theo's vision blurred for a second. As he stared at the scene before him, his chest tightened with recognition. The dim tunnel, a kid frozen in fear, a grown man with a weapon. It wasn't just this moment. He'd seen this before, lived something too close to forget. Memory crashed over him like a wave. Different voice, different scream, different night. Age 8, foster father's rage, locked closet, darkness pressing in, no one coming to help. He blinked hard and forced the memory away, shoved it down where it belonged. This wasn't about him. This was about the child in front of them, the boy who still had a chance. Theo clenched his fists. He would not watch another kid get taken. Not again, not while he could still stand. The president tilted his head slightly, reading the situation like chess moves on a board. Garrett's breathing quickened. His eyes darted around the tunnel, finally seeing the tactical positioning. The president raised his hand. From the darkness behind Garrett came a quiet reply. Garrett froze. Realization dawned across his face like cold sunlight. The Hells Angels weren't just in front of him. They'd flanked the tunnel. He was surrounded. Razor's gravelly voice came from inches behind Garrett's ear. Garrett jerked, twisted in blind panic. And that was the last mistake he made. The president shouted. Razor's arm shot forward. One clean, brutal movement. The knife flicked out of Garrett's hand, clattering across concrete. At the same instant, a second biker grabbed the child and rolled him to safety, and then the tunnel exploded with fists. No wasted motion, no hesitation, no mercy. Garrett was hit high, low, side, ribs, stomach, jaw, each strike a lesson in pain and precision. He dropped to his knees. The president stepped forward and delivered one last body shot that folded the man like wet cardboard. Garrett collapsed face first on the concrete. Unconscious. Finished. Silence rushed in after the violence. Then the child sobbed. Real sobs now. Relief mixed with terror, mixed with the slow realization that the nightmare was over. The president immediately knelt by the kid, checking for injuries. His hands were gentle despite their size. His voice was softer than Theo had ever heard it. The boy was shaking but conscious. Aware. Alive. Another biker cut the ropes binding the boy's wrists. The duct tape came away with the sound of tearing fabric. Red marks underneath, bruises forming. The kid whispered, voice trembling like a leaf in wind. A biker with a scarred cheek answered gently. More gently than seemed possible from a man covered in tattoos and leather. Theo stepped forward. His eyes were soft. His voice was careful. The boy sniffed, wiped his nose on his sleeve. 5 letters that shouldn't have been fighting for survival in a tunnel. Theo swallowed against the knot in his throat. Jamie looked up at him. Confusion crossed his tear-stained face. Theo half smiled. Jamie stared. One biker laughed. The sound echoed off concrete. The tension broke for a moment. Even the president's lips twitched in the faintest smile. Human moment in the aftermath of violence. Behind them, Garrett groaned, starting to regain consciousness. The president's expression turned to stone. He stood and walked over, stared down at the man responsible for two terrified children, two kids who would carry these scars forever. He didn't speak, didn't have to. Every angel in that tunnel knew this wasn't over. Garrett wasn't leaving on his feet, not after what he'd done. The president cracked his knuckles slowly, deliberately. The sound was sharp as breaking ice. Garrett's eyes fluttered open. The last thing he saw was the shadow of the man he should never have crossed, the face of consequences coming due. Garrett's eyes snapped open just in time to realize he'd made the worst bet of his life. He tried to scramble backward along the slick tunnel floor, palms slipping on grime and moisture. But he didn't make it more than a foot before a heavy biker boot came down, pressing just enough to stop him. Not crushing, just pinning, just making it crystal clear. He was done. The president crouched, forearm resting on his thigh, staring at the man like he was something scraped off a tire. His voice was quiet, no shouting, no barking, just controlled hatred. Garrett's voice trembled, wild and cracking. Before he could finish, Razor leaned in from the side and growled. Another biker added his voice. Garrett swallowed hard. He believed them. These weren't men who made empty threats. These were men who followed through. Every time one of the angels asked the question everyone was thinking, suggestions came immediately. Flat, serious, delivered like menu options, all said with absolute seriousness. Because this wasn't a gang. This was a code, and someone had broken it. Then Theo did something even he didn't expect. He stepped between Garrett and the president, not aggressively, just enough to be seen, enough to matter. The bikers tensed. The president's eyes narrowed slightly. Theo swallowed. His voice shook, but he spoke anyway. He nodded toward Jamie, who was being comforted by two angels across the tunnel. A slow silence fell over the space. One biker muttered quietly. Another grunted. The president held Theo's gaze, face unreadable. Then he exhaled slowly through his nose. He looked down at Garrett. Garrett whimpered. One biker leaned down and whispered into Garrett's ear. Two angels grabbed Garrett by the arms and dragged him through the tunnel like a sack of trash. His boots scraped against concrete. His head lolled. Finished. Jamie watched wide-eyed and silent, processing, trying to understand what had just happened, who these people were, why they'd come. Theo crouched down in front of him. Jamie nodded, voice tiny. Theo shook his head. Jamie looked at him again. Really looked, studying his face like trying to memorize it. Theo froze for a second, throat tightening. This time he didn't fight the emotion, didn't push it down. Jamie nodded and wiped his nose with his sleeve. The gesture was so normal, so childlike. It made Theo's chest ache. Theo stood and turned to the president, who was watching the exchange without expression. The president jerked his head toward the tunnel exit. They reached the ladder leading up to daylight, but just as the first biker started to climb, sound hit them from above. Engines, car doors slamming, radios crackling, voices barking orders. Someone whispered. Another biker grunted. The president's jaw clenched. Above them, muffled voices drifted down through the concrete shaft. This wasn't a greeting party. This was a standoff waiting to happen. Theo's heart thudded against his ribs. The president rubbed a hand down his beard, thinking fast, calculating options. Razor snorted. One by one, the angels climbed the ladder and emerged into the field above the tunnel. Theo came up right behind the president, and the moment his head cleared the surface, he froze. 12 squad cars, dozens of armed officers, SWAT vests, spotlights even though the sun was high, cameras, reporters, microphones. And right at the front, standing like he owned the world, was Mayor Richard Brennan, third-generation politician, 55 years old, polished suit, perfect hair, smile like a shark sensing blood. Theo whispered under his breath. The president stepped forward, arms crossed. The mayor smiled like a man posing for a headline photograph. Razor muttered quietly. The president ignored him. Looked the mayor dead in the eye. The mayor didn't even blink. The mayor turned to the cameras, pointing dramatically, shouting for maximum effect. Gasps rippled through the press line. Whispers, camera flashes, reporters leaning forward. This was the story they'd been waiting for. Theo stared, stunned. He'd known corruption existed, but he hadn't expected someone to flip the script this fast, this completely. Jamie peeked out from behind a biker, small and scared and still holding the cut duct tape in his hands. Theo whispered. The president nodded once. He stepped forward, tilted his head slightly, and said two words, cold and quiet and dangerous. The mayor stood front and center, chin lifted, chest puffed. Every camera pointed at him like weapons. To him, this wasn't a crime scene. It was a stage, one he intended to own completely. But the president wasn't backing down. Not today. Not after dragging a child out of hell to prevent worse. He stepped toward the mayor, slow, steady, boots grinding gravel. A police captain instinctively moved between them, hand hovering over her holster. Asian woman, 40s, 15-year veteran by the look of her. Name tag read Chen. The president didn't even glance at her weapon. Murmurs rippled through the officers. Captain Chen's hand relaxed slightly. Not because she trusted him, because she recognized truth when she heard it. The mayor's smile twitched, just for a moment, but Theo saw it. A crack in the armor, cameras rolled, reporters leaned in, microphones thrust forward, red recording lights glowing like bloodshot eyes. A reporter shouted over the noise. The mayor projected loud enough for every microphone to catch it. Theo stared, felt burning disbelief rise in his chest. Interfered, endangered. They'd saved a child while the mayor's own departments were still drawing up perimeter plans. The president tilted his head. The mayor didn't turn. Didn't need to. He had cameras, power, officers at his back. Or so he thought. Before the president could answer, Theo stepped forward. He didn't plan it, didn't rehearse. He just couldn't stay quiet anymore. Every camera swung towards him. The mayor's smile froze. Theo took another step. Adrenaline shoved his fear down into his shoes. A reporter snapped immediately. Theo didn't answer. Another voice did. Tiny. Brave. Jamie stepped out from behind Razor, eyes red from crying, but his voice was clear, strong, certain. Gasps rippled across the press line. One reporter lowered her microphone and whispered something that sounded like a prayer. The mayor paled for the briefest fraction of a second, then reassembled his mask. Razor's knuckles popped loudly. One biker muttered. Another answered quietly. The president lifted a hand. Silent command. Not yet. Hold. The mayor stepped closer to Theo, staring down his nose. His voice was quiet, meant only for Theo's ears. But microphones caught it anyway. That did it. The temperature changed. The angels weren't just angry anymore. They were dangerous. One biker whispered. Another responded. Still the president didn't move. Theo didn't back down either. He looked the mayor dead in the eyes. Then he glanced back at the wall of bikers behind him. The mayor waved at Captain Chen. A few officers hesitated. Not out of fear, confusion. Even they hadn't expected that order. One officer finally spoke. Young, maybe late 20s. Voice uncertain. The mayor snapped. Captain Chen swallowed. If they moved on the angels here, it could turn into a riot. Blood on pavement. Bodies. Her career would end either way. Then she asked the one question that froze everything. Silence. No reporters. No shouts. Just wind across the grass. The mayor blinked. The captain pointed. Two officers were dragging Garrett up from the tunnel. Hands zip-tied behind him. Face bruised and swollen. Guilty as sin itself. The mayor looked at the cameras. He couldn't praise the angels. Not politically. Not publicly. His entire platform was built on being tough on motorcycle clubs. So he tried to play both sides. He spread his hands and shouted. The president finally spoke. His voice was level, calm, too calm. The mayor grinned. The president leaned in, voice low. Weapons weren't drawn, but hands hovered. Police on one side, Hell's Angels on the other. Two forces on the edge of ignition. Right in the middle stood a homeless boy, a terrified, rescued child, a mayor trying to rewrite reality, and cameras catching all of it. The president cracked his neck casually. He tapped two fingers on the top of his vest. The mayor laughed, dripping arrogance. Theo reached into his pocket and pulled out something small. Simple. Something the mayor didn't expect. A phone, screen lit, red recording timer blinking. 47 minutes and counting. Theo raised it high. His voice was quiet, but it carried. Reporters exploded. Camera flashes went off like lightning strikes. Questions erupted in a cacophony of noise. The mayor's face drained of color. For the first time all morning, he looked afraid. Theo held the phone up, screen still recording, red timer flashing like a warning beacon. Reporters zoomed in immediately, cameras locked onto the tiny device as if it were nuclear codes. The mayor sputtered, mouth opening, but unable to form a defense. He hadn't expected this, hadn't accounted for the homeless kid having power. The president folded his arms. The mayor snapped. A reporter shouted back, "Young woman, blonde, aggressive." Another yelled. Microphones thrust forward again. Camera shutters exploded like gunfire. The mayor looked around, suddenly surrounded not by police but by press. Hungry, predatory, sensing blood in the water. Captain Chen stared at Jamie, still trembling. Rope burns on his wrists, tears drying on his cheeks. Then at Garrett, bruised, unconscious, guilty beyond any reasonable doubt. Then at the mayor, desperate, political, wrong. The mayor hissed. Chen took a slow breath, looked at her officers. Some nodded slightly. Permission, understanding. She made her decision. The words came out clear and firm. Gasps shot through the press line. The mayor's eyes went wide. Chen squared her shoulders. Officer solidarity happened slowly. One by one, officers shifted their stance, no longer pointing at the angels, waiting to see what came next. The mayor realized he'd lost control. His own police force was abandoning him. Razor muttered to the president. The president shook his head. It showed. The president wasn't just muscle, he was principle. Before the mayor could pivot, Jamie stepped forward into the space between cameras and authority. His voice was tiny in the huge moment. Everything went silent. Wind, traffic, breath itself. Tears rolled down his face, but his voice stayed steady. He pointed at the angels. Even hardened bikers looked away. Emotion visible despite years of practice hiding it. Reporter reactions were immediate. One wiped her eyes. Another started clapping. Others joined. Not for the mayor, for the rescuers, for truth, for justice done right. The mayor's carefully rehearsed political mask shattered completely. He pointed at Theo and shouted. Theo didn't have to answer. Jamie's truth was louder than any accusation. The mayor, desperate now, reached toward the president's vest. Tried to grab it. Physical intimidation. Assault disguised as authority. The president didn't move. Just leaned in. Whispered loud enough for nearby cameras to catch. Every photographer captured it. The mayor's hand mid-grab. Perfect headline image. Perfect scandal. Perfect evidence of everything wrong with power. The mayor jerked back like touching fire. But it was already too late. The court of public opinion had seen enough. The president finally addressed the cameras himself, spoke calmly, plainly, not a politician, not a rehearsed performer, just a man telling truth. He looked at Jamie. Reporters scribbled furiously. The president nodded toward the mayor. A few reporters almost choked, trying not to laugh. The president finished. Silence. Then one reporter started clapping. Then another. And another. Within seconds, the press line was applauding. Not the mayor, not the institution, the rescuers, the angels. The mayor turned red. He whispered through clenched teeth. The president smirked. He nodded toward the bikers holding Garrett. One officer stepped forward. No hesitation this time. Took custody of the kidnapper. Not the angels, not Theo, not the press. Just the criminal. Justice finally moving in the right direction. The mayor watched his entire narrative collapse right in front of him. Live on camera, recorded for history. Theo finally exhaled. His legs felt weak, heart hammered from adrenaline crash. The president walked up beside him and gave a small nod. Theo swallowed. The president stared at him. Razor slapped Theo on the back so hard he almost folded in half. Another biker laughed. Theo allowed himself a tiny smile. For once, he didn't feel small, didn't feel powerless. He felt like someone who mattered. But as the bikers started walking back toward their motorcycles, the president pulled Theo aside. His voice was quiet. Warning. Theo frowned. The president looked at the swarm of reporters still filming, at the mayor who stood isolated and furious. Then toward the darkness beyond the field. Theo's smile faded. The president put a heavy hand on his shoulder. The night should have ended with celebration. Jamie was safe. Garrett was in custody. The truth was recorded for the world to see. But instead, there was weight in the air. Unease nobody could shake. Because the president was right. Men like Mayor Brennan didn't lose quietly. They went home, poured drinks, stared into mirrors, and plotted revenge. The angels knew it. As the convoy of bikes rumbled away from the field, police cars peeling off in opposite directions, Theo felt the awareness in every engine vibration beneath him. Not fear, not regret, just knowing. They had crossed a line. The other side wasn't going to pretend it hadn't happened. The angels didn't head home. They roared straight to the clubhouse. Neon lights shining off chrome tanks. Music rumbling through the ground even before they arrived. Doors swinging open as members and old-timers leaned out. The story spread through the building like electricity. Kid rescued. Mayor tried to arrest everyone. Homeless kid recorded it. Reporters destroyed the mayor. A cheer went up that nearly shook the walls. Theo found himself pulled inside, clapped on the back, handed water bottles he hadn't asked for, half hugged by men with arms the size of tree trunks. He wasn't used to this. Being seen, being recognized, being valued. It was overwhelming. Razor dropped onto a bar stool beside him. Theo nodded, still processing. Razor chuckled. Theo smiled awkwardly. It didn't feel real yet. Maybe tomorrow it would, maybe never. Across the room, Jamie sat at a big booth, surrounded by bikers twice the size of his nightmares. Yet he wasn't scared anymore. He was smiling, eating fries, drinking soda like it was the finest vintage on earth. One biker handed him his patched leather vest. Jamie slipped it on. It practically swallowed him whole. Every biker in a 10-foot radius melted instantly. Brothers in black leather, softening because of one kid who'd been through too much in one night. Theo watched it all. Felt something twist inside, not jealousy, not sadness, something smaller, something older. Memory of sleeping on benches, food from dumpsters, no one kneeling down to say he was safe, no one saying he belonged. He blinked and let the thought go. Tonight wasn't about him. It was about a kid who got saved before his world broke completely. The room abruptly quieted as the president stepped up on a small wooden stage near the bar. No microphone, no fanfare. He didn't need either. Men who had seen prison and war and worse leaned in. Falling silent as he spoke, he pointed toward Jamie. Every biker turned toward Theo. His face flushed hot. Everyone frowned, confused. The president explained. Razor muttered. A few chuckles broke the tension. But understanding settled over the room. The fight wasn't finished. The president's voice hardened. A quiet settled again. Not fear, preparation. These were men who lived expecting storms. They didn't run from weather. They tuned their engines and rode straight through. The rumble of another engine outside cut through the atmosphere. Conversation stopped. Hands instinctively drifted near holsters, pockets, belts. The door opened. Moment of tension, then relief. It wasn't SWAT, wasn't lawyers. It was Captain Chen. Still in uniform, still in duty boots, but noticeably alone. The clubhouse parted for her. She walked straight to the president, paused, then extended her hand. Professional, respectful. The president took it. Chen swallowed. Razor shrugged. Chen almost smiled. Then her expression sobered. The room leaned in, every eye on her. Liam stiffened. Chen nodded. Razor rolled his eyes, but Chen wasn't done. The room went dead silent. Theo's stomach dropped. Chen nodded again. The president's jaw clenched. Chen said it plainly. One biker slammed his fist on a table. Chen replied quietly. Theo felt sick. Everything they did, everything they risked, could be turned upside down in a single press release. The president didn't shout, didn't swear. He looked around the room slowly. Razor nudged Theo. Theo blinked. Chen answered before the president could. Theo swallowed. Chen pointed at him. Theo went quiet, processing. He finally had something to lose. Razor grinned. A ripple of laughter eased the tension again. But Theo didn't laugh. He knew this wasn't a joke. He finally mattered, which meant he could finally be destroyed. The president placed a hand on his shoulder. Theo nodded, turned toward a small side room where someone had already set up blankets and a pillow for him. He stopped in the doorway and looked back. Dozens of men, dangerous, loud, hard-edged, watched him without mockery, without annoyance, but with respect. He swallowed, voice soft. Razor called out. Theo turned. Razor lifted a can of soda. Theo managed a tired smile. But outside the clubhouse, an engine idled across the street. Lights off, windows up. A figure inside sat with phone in hand, snapping blurry photos through a cracked window. Bikes, patches, faces. Theo entering the building. Another shot, another angle, and another digital bullet loaded for tomorrow's headlines. The phone screen lit up with a message from an unknown number. The figure hit upload, shifted the car into drive, and disappeared into the night. Mission accomplished. Ammunition delivered. The mayor's counterattack was already loading. Theo didn't sleep long. He woke before sunrise, heart pounding, mind racing. He washed his face in the tiny clubhouse bathroom, dried it with a rough towel, stared at his reflection in the spotted mirror. Just a homeless kid. But today the city would decide if he was the hero who saved a child or a criminal in league with bikers. He stepped out into the main room. Most of the angels were already awake, coffee steaming in huge metal jugs, maps on tables, phones buzzing with notifications. Razor waved him over. Theo blinked. Razor slid a tablet across the table. There it was. Hashtags trending. Stand with Theo. Hell's Angels heroes. Where was the mayor? Video clips from reporters were everywhere. Some praising his bravery, others asking hard questions about mayoral negligence. Theo's hands shook. The world was watching. Then a headline appeared, bold. Front page of a major local news site. Theo went pale. Razor slammed his fist on the table. Theo read the article. Statements from Garrett's lawyer, expensive suit, clearly paid for by someone with deep pockets. Claims that Jamie was with a family friend. The Hells Angels stormed in violently without cause. Theo fabricated the story under coaching from bikers. Disgusting lies, but powerful ones. Within minutes, social media was divided. People arguing online. Some headlines defending Jamie, others labeling the Angels criminals who manipulated a homeless kid for publicity. The president stepped in. Calm as ever, he looked at Theo. The Angels didn't ride out mob style. Only three went. The president, Razor, Theo. They rode in a black pickup instead of bikes. No intimidation, no flash, just professionalism. Downtown reporters were already setting up on courthouse steps, ready for the mayor's morning press statement. But the president led Theo to a different podium across the plaza. No press permission, no city invitation, just raw truth and cameras waiting for a better story. A reporter recognized Theo immediately. Suddenly, microphones, cameras, questions firing like bullets, rapid fire without pause. The president raised a hand. Silence fell like a curtain. He stepped aside and whispered. Theo swallowed, nodded, stepped up to face the world. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried across the plaza. That alone froze reporters mid-keystroke. Pens stopped moving. Cameras focused tighter. He told them everything. Sophie's cry in the alley. The knife fight that left him bleeding. Jamie trapped in the tunnel. The mayor trying to arrest the wrong people. Most importantly, he never glorified himself. Didn't act like a hero, just told truth. The plaza erupted. Applause from people on the street. Reporters typing furiously. Even the police escort outside listened in silence. Theo finished strong. Cameras caught every word. Reporters shouted follow-up questions. Phones across the country buzzed with new headlines breaking in real time. Razor leaned over. Across the street inside City Hall, a television played the speech. The mayor watched, gripping the edge of his desk hard enough to turn his knuckles white. An advisor stepped in nervously. The mayor snapped. He whipped around. The advisor swallowed, slid a folder onto the desk. Photos? Blurry. Taken last night through a windshield. Angels, motorcycles, clubhouse entrance, and Theo walking inside. The advisor tapped the photos. The mayor smirked. 5 minutes later, every news alert chimed at once. Breaking photos show Theo entering biker clubhouse after incident. Twitter exploded. Half the people said he was safe with the guys who saved the child. The other half screamed manipulation and grooming. Razor read the update and muttered. The president didn't flinch. He placed a hand on Theo's shoulder. Theo frowned. The president nodded toward the courthouse doors where Jamie and his mother were arriving. Jamie wasn't forced to speak. He insisted. His mother sat beside him, terrified but proud. A small microphone was adjusted to his height. Jamie took a deep breath, and the boy everyone thought was too traumatized looked toward the cameras. The man grabbed him. He was scared. Theo saved him. Silence. Pins dropping would have echoed. Jamie continued, voice wavering but not stopping. His voice cracked, but he pushed through. Behind the podium, the president whispered to Razor. Razor grinned. Inside his office, the mayor saw the broadcast. Jamie's testimony. The clean, unshakable truth from the one witness no PR firm could discredit. The mayor sank into his chair. His advisor cleared his throat. The mayor stared blankly at the screen. He wasn't just losing a narrative anymore. He was losing his future, his legacy, everything. As Jamie's press appearance ended, another police officer approached the Angels, the same stern-looking woman from before. Captain Chen. She didn't greet anyone, simply asked plainly. Theo slowly raised his hand. She handed him a legal envelope. Theo opened it with shaking fingers. Inside was a formal document, stamped with a city seal. Not a lawsuit, not a summons, not a threat. Notice of intent to investigate alleged misconduct. Mayor's office. Chen gave a thin smile, and with that she walked away, leaving the words hanging in the morning air. Razor stared after her. The president smiled slightly. Theo held the envelope against his chest. Relief, fear, gratitude, all tangled together like knotted rope. The president looked toward City Hall. Theo clutched the envelope tighter. For the first time in 3 years, he felt something dangerous blooming in his chest. Hope. Real hope. The kind that could be crushed, but also the kind that could change everything. Liam didn't plan to become a symbol. He didn't plan to change anything. He just wanted to save a kid. But the world doesn't care what you intend, only what you do. And what he did traveled farther than he could ever imagine. A week later, Ashford was different. Not dramatically, not overnight, but noticeably. People held conversations at coffee shops about child safety and police accountability. Mothers discussed new protocols. Men on lunch breaks talked about corruption at City Hall. The town was waking up to truths it had ignored too long. Theo walked through it all, hood pulled up, backpack over his shoulder, still not used to being recognized. He passed a bus stop where 2 teenagers sat scrolling phones. They looked up, eyes widening. Theo froze. Not mockery in their voices, not pity, respect. He nodded awkwardly. He kept walking, but something in his chest felt warm. Strange, new, like sunlight breaking through clouds after years of rain. In the courthouse, the investigation into Mayor Brennan was well underway. Whistleblowers stepped forward with sealed envelopes. Emails emerged showing pressure on police departments. Phone calls leaked revealing orders to delay the Amber Alert for Sophie, to ignore biker complaints regardless of merit. Turns out the kidnapping wasn't connected to the mayor, but the cover-up attempt absolutely was. Chen provided internal memos, orders to make the Angels look bad no matter the chaos, evidence of campaign funds paying for Garrett's expensive lawyer, obstruction of justice wrapped in political machinery. The newspaper headline read, "City government misused authority. Child's life made second priority." Not about the kidnapping itself, about the system that failed afterward, about power protecting itself instead of innocence. Public pressure mounted from every angle. City council emergency meetings, protesters outside City Hall holding signs, business owners fearing reputation damage, police union withdrawing support. Everyone smelled blood in the water. Brennan gave a public statement, face stiff, voice controlled, reading from prepared remarks. But everyone knew the truth. He was only sorry he got caught. Within days, the pressure became unbearable. Council members, public forums, parents demanding accountability, officers refusing to follow his orders. He resigned. Not fired, not arrested, just forced out by public confidence, lost. The announcement came on a gray Thursday morning. Short press release. Effective immediately. Gone. Theo read the news on Razor's phone at the clubhouse. He didn't cheer, didn't smirk, just stared at the screen. Razor nodded. Theo thought about that, about how truth wasn't always gentle, how sometimes it had to be sharp to cut through lies thick as steel. 2 days after the resignation, Theo received an envelope. Official courthouse letterhead. He assumed bad news. A summons, a correction, something stressful. His hand shook opening it. Inside was a handwritten note, elegant script on cream paper, from Judge Maria Santos. Theo sat on the clubhouse couch staring at the card for a long time. A tear fell before he even realized it. He wiped his face quickly. Razor pretended not to notice. Good bikers knew when not to pry. But there was more. A second envelope, thicker, official, City Youth Development Program letterhead. Theo's hands trembled harder as he read. Full scholarship, housing, education, mentorship, a stable place to stay, a bed, a room, a future. Theo just stared. Housing. The word seemed impossible. Something from a different universe. He'd spent 3 years without a real bed. 3 years sleeping where he could. And now this. Razor grinned wide. The president clapped a heavy hand on Theo's shoulder. Theo's voice broke. A city official who'd delivered the letter smiled. Theo was alone in his temporary room that night, staring at the acceptance letter. First real opportunity in years. But it meant leaving this place. These people. The only ones who'd seen him in so long. The president entered without knocking, sat on the edge of the bed. Pause. Heavy with meaning. Theo looked up, eyes wet. Razor appeared in the doorway. The president placed something in Theo's palm. Cold metal, the brass pin from before, club initials engraved. Razor rubbed the back of his neck. The president finished. Theo closed his fingers around the pin. Tight, meaningful, his first real possession in years, first symbol that he mattered to someone. That night, Theo couldn't sleep. He thought about Jamie. The kid had nightmares those first few days, waking up crying, calling for his mom. But Theo visited nearly every afternoon. They sat together on the back steps of Jamie's apartment building, talking, processing. Jamie spoke quietly one day. Theo looked out over the parking lot. Jamie blinked. Theo chuckled softly. Jamie's face showed surprise. Theo sat up straighter. Jamie nodded slowly, and for the first time in days, he smiled, really smiled. Like maybe the world wasn't all darkness and fear. Like maybe he could be okay. 2 days later, a man in a city windbreaker showed up at the clubhouse. The angels tensed, but he raised both hands calmly. Razor crossed his arms. The man looked at Theo. He pulled a small envelope from his coat pocket, handed it over. Theo opened it with shaking hands. Inside was the formal letter, the scholarship, the housing, everything written in official language that made it real, permanent, true. Razor grinned. The president's hand on Theo's shoulder was warm, solid, real. Theo didn't know whether to laugh or cry. He settled for something in between. The council representative smiled. When the official left, the clubhouse went quiet. The president turned to Theo. His voice was softer than usual. He paused, let the words sink in. Theo looked up. The president smiled gently. Razor snorted. Theo grinned weakly. Razor nodded with satisfaction. The president stepped closer, pressed the brass pin firmly into Theo's palm one more time. Razor added. The president finished. Theo closed his fingers around the pin. His throat was too tight to speak. So he just nodded, hoping they understood, hoping they knew what they had given him wasn't just help. It was proof he existed, proof he mattered. Late that night, Theo lay in the small room, staring at the ceiling. Tomorrow he'd move to student housing. Tomorrow everything would change. He thought about his mother, dead 3 years now. He remembered her voice, tired but loving. At the time, he hadn't believed her, thought it was just something mother said. But lying there in the darkness, after saving 2 kids, after standing up to a mayor, after being seen by the world, he wondered if maybe she'd been right all along. 2 days later, Theo stood outside his new place, student housing assigned by the city program. Nothing fancy, just a door that locked, a clean mattress, a desk, a window, 4 walls that were his. He set his small backpack on the floor, sat on the bed. It didn't shake, didn't creak, didn't smell like rain or mildew or alley concrete. He lay back slowly, looked up at the ceiling. Clean white paint, no water stains, no mold, just normal. He whispered to the empty room. Sleep came without fear. For the first time in 3 years, he didn't wake up every hour checking his surroundings. Didn't startle at sounds, just slept, deep and dreamless and safe. His phone buzzed in the morning, text from Jamie. Just one sentence. Thank you for saving me. Theo typed back with trembling fingers. You saved me too. Because it was true. If not for Jamie and Sophie, he'd still be invisible. Still be nobody. Still be forgotten. A month later, on a sunny Saturday morning, Theo walked outside his building and froze. An entire line of bikes sat waiting in the street, chrome shining, engines off. The angel standing beside them like an honor guard. Razor shouted. Theo laughed. Actually laughed. The sound felt foreign in his throat. He jogged over. The president handed him a helmet. Theo strapped it on. Razor swung onto his bike. Theo shrugged. The president grinned. Engines roared to life. Neighbors peeked out windows. People on the sidewalk stopped to watch. Full biker escort for a kid who used to sleep under stairs, who used to be invisible, who used to be nothing. Theo climbed onto the back of Razor's bike, the familiar rumble beneath him. The president led the formation. They pulled away slowly at first, then faster, like moving towards something bigger than fear, bigger than pain, bigger than the past. They rode through downtown Ashford, past the courthouse where Jamie had testified, past the steel yard where it all began, past City Hall where the mayor had fallen. A full loop, invisible boy to visible hero, nobody to somebody, lost to found. The wind tore at Theo's face. The sun warmed his back. Brotherhood surrounded him on all sides. And for the first time in his entire life, Theo felt like he belonged somewhere. Not because of blood, not because of obligation, but because of choice. Because he'd proven himself. Because he mattered. They rode for hours, out of the city, into the hills, along winding roads where the only sound was engines and wind. The president led them to an overlook. Ashford spread out below, small, contained, manageable from this height. The president killed his engine. Everyone followed. Silence rushed in after the mechanical thunder. Theo climbed off, legs shaky, face windburned, but smiling. The president stood beside him, looking out over the town. Theo looked at him, really looked. This man who'd shown him that family wasn't about blood, that protection wasn't always gentle, that sometimes the people society feared were the ones who did the most good. Razor appeared on Theo's other side. Theo felt tears threaten, but he didn't care anymore. Didn't care if they saw. These men had seen him at his weakest, had lifted him up anyway, had given him worth when the world said he had none. The president placed a hand on Theo's shoulder one last time. Theo nodded, couldn't speak past the lump in his throat. But he understood that this moment was both an ending and a beginning, that he was leaving but also arriving, that he'd always be welcome here, but he didn't have to stay. They rode back as the sun set, golden light turning everything soft and warm. Theo watched the road disappear beneath them, watched the world blur into color and motion, and he thought about all the kids out there, still invisible, still forgotten, still waiting for someone to see them. Maybe someday he could be that person for someone else. Maybe that was the real lesson. Not that he'd been saved, but that he'd learned how to save others, how to stand up when it was easier to walk away, how to be brave when fear was screaming. 6 months later, Theo's life looked completely different. He had the student housing, a part-time job at the community center teaching kids self-defense, GED classes 3 nights a week, a mentor through the city program, friends his own age, normal teenage problems like homework and curfews. But he still wore the brass pin every day, still visited the clubhouse on weekends, still rode with the angels when they went out. Because some bonds weren't temporary, some family wasn't biological. Sophie sent him drawings, stick figures labeled My Hero in crayon. Jamie joined a youth boxing program, learning to fight back, learning to protect himself and others. Both kids were healing. slowly, with setbacks and nightmares, but healing nonetheless. The president told Theo over coffee one morning. His voice was quiet but firm, proud. Captain Chen had been promoted to chief of police. Her first act was reforming policies on vulnerable populations, creating better protocols for Amber Alerts, improving response times. She credited Theo in her acceptance speech, standing at a podium in full uniform. Theo watched it online, felt something swell in his chest. Not pride exactly, more like validation. Proof that what he'd done mattered, that the pain had purpose. A new mayor was elected, reformist, progressive, focused on transparency and accountability. Foster care oversight increased. Homeless youth programs expanded with actual funding. Theo was invited to serve on an advisory board, sharing his perspective, making sure other kids didn't fall through the cracks. He sat in those meetings wearing his brass pin, speaking truth to power, making sure people in suits remembered that policy affected real lives, that numbers on spreadsheets were actual human beings. That invisibility was a choice society made, not an inevitability. One afternoon, Theo sat in the community center office, teaching schedule on the wall, kids' drawings taped to filing cabinets. His phone rang. Unknown number. He almost didn't answer. A woman's voice, professional but warm. Theo's heart stopped. She explained. National news outlet. Wanted to do a feature story about the boy who stood up to corruption, who saved two kids, who recorded proof and changed a city. Would he be interested in an interview? Theo thought about it. Thought about all the invisible kids out there. All the ones sleeping behind steel yards and under bridges. All the ones the world had decided to forget. Maybe his story could help them. Maybe being visible could make others visible too. He said yes. The interview aired 3 weeks later, primetime slot. Millions of viewers. Theo told his story. The hunger, the fear, the choice to help when it was easier to walk away. The mother who'd believed in him. The angels who'd shown him family. The kids who'd given him purpose. The host asked the question everyone wanted answered. Theo thought about that, really thought. Then he gave the only answer that made sense. He paused, let the words sink in, let them mean something. The camera held on his face, on the brass pin visible on his shirt collar, on the determination in his eyes. And across the country, invisible kids watched. And maybe, just maybe, they felt a little less alone. After the interview, Theo walked outside the studio, night air cool on his skin. He looked up at the stars, thought about his mother, about Sophie and Jamie, about Ghost and Roller and all the angels, about Captain Chen and Judge Santos, about every person who'd seen him when it would have been easier to look away. He pulled out his phone, sent a text to the angels group chat. Simple words, but loaded with meaning. Thank you for everything. The responses came fast. Razor first, anytime kid, then others. Always got your back. Your family. Come by this weekend. Theo smiled, put his phone away, started walking toward the bus stop. But then he heard it, distant at first, then louder. The rumble of engines. He turned. The angels appeared around the corner. Full formation, led by the president. They pulled up beside him. Not a rescue this time, just a ride home. The president handed him a helmet. Theo climbed on. They rode through the city, lights blurring, wind singing, and Theo understood finally, completely. He hadn't just been saved that day in the alley. He'd been seen, and being seen, being valued, being loved. That was worth more than any house or bed or normal life. That was worth everything. Years would pass. Theo would finish school, would start a nonprofit for homeless youth, would speak at conferences and city councils, would help pass legislation protecting vulnerable kids, would never forget where he came from or who helped him rise. And every time he told his story, he'd touch the brass pin. Still worn, still carried, still meaningful. He'd tell people the truth. He'd look at the audience, at the kids in the back row with haunted eyes, at the ones society had decided to forget. And he'd speak directly to them because Theo Walker had learned the most important lesson. Not that the strong survive, not that the world is fair, but that sometimes, just sometimes, one person standing up can change everything. One voice can become a chorus. One invisible kid can teach a whole city how to see, and that was worth every moment of hunger, every night of fear, every second of pain. Because now he could help others find their way out of darkness. Now he could be the person he'd needed when he was small and scared and alone. Now he could matter, and he did. The final image Theo carried was simple. A Saturday afternoon, riding with the angels through Ashford streets, sun warm, engine steady, brothers beside him, the president leading the way, not running from anything, not chasing anything, just being, just existing in a moment of perfect peace. The president looked back once, caught Theo's eye, nodded. Nothing else needed. Just acknowledgement, just respect, just family. And Theo nodded back, held on, and rode toward whatever came next. Because he wasn't invisible anymore. He wasn't powerless. He wasn't alone. He was Theo Walker. He mattered. And nothing, absolutely nothing, could take that away. The convoy disappeared around a bend, engines fading into the distance, leaving only the memory of chrome and courage, of a homeless boy who refused to stay invisible, of angels who rode for justice, of a city that learned to see. And somewhere behind a steel yard, in the shadows where forgotten kids still waited, one of them heard the engines, looked up, and wondered, just for a moment, if maybe, possibly, they mattered too. They did. They always had. The world just needed someone to show them.